Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome. My name is Alec Harris. I'm honored to serve as president of GIA Publications, and it's my incredible honor to have this very distinguished guest of panelists on board with us, including Tim Sharp, who's kind of the main editor and author of the book Relevance in the Choral Arts. And in this particular moment in time, this idea of relevance in the era of COVID-19, I can't think of a more important topic for all of us to address. Just a couple of logistics. First of all, again, in the chat, please, if you haven't already, put your name, what you teach, where you live, so we can all see who's there. Unfortunately, because of the number of people on the webinar, we're not going to be able to see your faces. We're just going to be able to see the chat. I apologize for that, but just makes it the webinar work much better. If you have questions, I encourage you to please enter questions using the Q&A, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, a link to the Q&A. And so please enter any questions there. And then finally, we are recording this webinar. So we will be posting it later to our social media and YouTube channel. So feel free to share it out. We'll send you an email about that as well. And then finally, we do have this amazing book called Relevance in the Choral Arts, which I encourage all of you to get from GIA. And there is a coupon code. It's all cap, the word relevance. If you go to the GIA website and use that coupon code, you'll get 10% off on that book. So encourage you to check it out. Okay, with that preamble, it's very much my honor to introduce this amazing group of panelists. First, since 1989, Joanne Miller has been director of choral activities at North Dakota State University, where she conducts the concert choir and teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in conducting and choral literature. Her involvement in the American Choral Director Association includes North Carolina State President, and she served as North Central Division President from 2006 to 2008, and is currently the National Treasurer and member of the Executive Board, or was a member of the Executive Board from 2009 to 2017. Dr. Miller is Artistic Director of the NDSU Baroque Festival and was Chorus Master of the Fargo-Moorhead Symphony Orchestra. She was named a University Distinguished Professor in 2009, the highest honor awarded to faculty at NDSU, and in 2013 was awarded the Faculty Lectureship. She earned her degrees from NDSU, the University of North Dakota, and the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. And she is an active clinician and guest conductor throughout the United States. Jennifer Rogers has directed large community concert choirs in the Washington, D.C. area and the Seattle, Washington area, with a focus on civic partnerships and socially relevant programming that have grown these organizations in both audience and membership. Her teaching and research as a choral conducting DMA candidate and soon to be DMA in about 1.5 more days.
One day
at the University of Washington, as well as her performing credits as singer, actress, and conductor reflect her passion for bringing music into non-traditional settings and using it to start conversations. Jennifer's original theater company, Plunge Cabaret, centers on uniting higher education and community service organizations through residency and collaborative performance. And again, congratulations, Jennifer, on your DMA.
Thank you.
Juan Carlos Acosta is Artistic Director of Sacra Profana and the Director of Music Ministries at the Village Community Presbyterian Church in Rancho Santa Fe, California. Juan Carlos has held teaching positions at the University of San Diego, Cuyamaca College, and the Chula Vista School for the Creative and Performing Arts. He maintains an active schedule as an honor choir conductor, presenter, clinician, and guest conductor. Juan Carlos is conducted at every level from professional opera to elementary music and has been hailed by critics and audiences alike for his innovative programming. Alex Gardner is the Artistic and Executive Director of the Pensacola Children's Chorus in Pensacola, Florida. Alex is an advocate of teaching people through music, a philosophy which champions as a guest conductor, clinician, and conference, which he champions as a guest conductor, clinician, and conference presenter across the United States. He serves as the Children's and Youth Repertoire and Resources Chair for the southern region of the ACDA. Alex is an accomplished composer and arranger for children's and youth voices and has a varied background in the church music, show choir, musical theater, and nonprofit administration worlds. Joy Hirokawa, DMA, is the founder and artistic director of the Bel Canto Youth Chorus of the Bach Choir of Bethlehem. She is a passionate advocate for teaching youth about social justice through choral music. Joy is a published arranger specializing in authentic arrangements of jazz and ethnic music for young voices, and co-author of Inside the Choral Rehearsal Method and Rehearsal Guide for Tom Shelton's Shady Grove. She is a frequent guest conductor and clinician and is the current ACDA National Repertoire and Resources Chair for Children and Community Youth Choirs. Last but not least, Tim Sharp, DMA, is Executive Director of the American Choral Directors Association and Artistic Director of the Tulsa Chorale in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tim pursues an aggressive agenda of strategic planning and progressive initiatives to keep ACDA energized and relevant in the 21st century. He represents choral activity in the United States to the International Federation for Choral Music, IFCM, and serves the Federation as Vice President. He appears regularly as guest conductor and choral clinician throughout the world. Tim has varied his career with teaching positions in higher ed, the music publication industry, and in nonprofit administration. Relevance in the Choral Art is the fourth book in his series of strategic imperatives advanced in Sharp's administrative leadership role. The other subjects addressed in the series include mentoring in the ensemble arts, collaboration in the ensemble arts, and innovation in the ensemble arts. With that, Tim, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alec, and thank you to GIA for your progressive work in all areas of choral leadership, choral education. We are much better as a profession, absolutely, because of the work of GIA and you being behind the work of GIA. We all collectively thank you for your great contribution to our field. I also thank this panelist group that has assembled today. These are people, as you heard, the common thread that runs through this symposium, this webinar, is ACDA, the American Choral Directors Association. These folks here are leaders and thinkers that have helped us tremendously in their regions and their national contribution to ACDA, and today particularly as we look at this important topic of relevance. In order to frame this, I've asked Joanne Miller. Dr. Miller is the Director of Choral Activities, as you heard, at North Dakota State University. North Dakota State University was the organizer behind the symposium that led to this book. Dr. Miller and her colleagues there worked directly with me in order to move this initiative forward and bring it into reality. And so I've asked Joanne if she would to frame our history and to frame where we are with this topic and why we're bringing it to you today. Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Alec. When my colleagues, Mike Weber and Charlotte Moe, along with Tim, were contemplating our third NDSU ACDA Choral Symposium a couple of years ago, we discussed the topic of how the study and practice of choral music has changed over the decades, how choral conductors have increasingly come to see that singing in a choral organization is an activity that can have great relevance and significance to our singers, our audiences, and our communities. The choral profession has historically focused on different aspects of our art. Before World War II, all kinds of new music was being published, and that was the focus of conductors. Shortly after World War II, we began to see the development of different schools of choral tone and choral pedagogy. And then graduate schools in choral conducting became more prevalent in the 50s and 60s, and that showed the beginnings of the study of performance practice. Somewhat later came the idea that there was more to choral performance than just performing historically authentic performances with good tone. Singers had to communicate the meaning of the text to their audiences. Most conductors today have incorporated music of other cultures into their repertoire of their choirs, and contemporary choral music is strongly valued and supported. So all these aspects of our art are still important, but in planning our symposium, we wanted to think about the next step. What was happening in our choral world now that's moving us forward in new and exciting ways? The symposium in this book demonstrates some examples of the incredible work that choral conductors are doing all over the country to ensure that their singers find their work in choral music relevant and significant in their lives and what they prepare and perform for their communities. The additional complexity of COVID-19 makes this discussion even more important. I know that you'll enjoy hearing about the work from some of the presenters who were at our symposium. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. As I contributed my chapter and essay to this book and to the symposium, what I attempted to do was to outline what I called the alchemy of relevance. And what I mean by that is that when I did my work on relevance and what it means to be relevant in a choral program and a choral educational program, I looked into what part of relevance in our activity is what I called part golf swing. In other words, what are the kinds of things that can be outlined, that you can coach, that you can say, follow this list and you can result, and things will result in a more relevant program. So I looked at the part that was part golf swing, but Alchemy of Relevance was exploring deeper than that. Is there a secret sauce? Is there something that really can be done that is inserted into your thinking, into your mindset, that would really make the difference? And what I discovered from programs that I studied around the country in my own programming was that there was indeed part golf swing, part secret sauce. I'm going to jump first of all to the part that I would say is part golf swing. And that is, are there how-tos? Is there a list? And to that idea, we turn to Jennifer Rogers, who contributed the second chapter of our book, and that is called a rubric for choral relevance. In her work and in her outline and in the book, she presents a graphic that gives us some of that aspect that is the golf swing. What is the rubric that is there at the heart of creating relevant programs? So Jennifer, may I turn this over to you to talk about a rubric for choral relevance?
Sure. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Alec, and everyone for tuning in. So yes, hopefully you'll be seeing a graphic on the screen somewhere here very soon. And my road to relevance is almost entirely through building relationship, believing that people will only truly be impacted by something that they are already connected to. And over the course of my many individual projects, I was curious to pull out and look at the process more broadly and discern how very specific questions of relationship could become a more systemic foundation of choral organizations as a whole. And that work resulted in the rubric that you see. I use this as a constant guide. It helps me to check assumptions, most importantly, and to look at any initiative from multiple angles. And I'm going to spend most of my few minutes here today up in the top left corner of this rubric, looking at what I call specific who-based relevancy. This is where most of those assumptions really show themselves, and it's also where I have learned to keep revisiting through any planning process, and that will become evident here. So to start with just a small battery of questions, each of which, of course, would want more attention were you doing it for your own process. And the most basic of them is, who do you want to connect to? The easy traditional answer to that is to your audience, but right away, there are a lot of assumptions present in that answer. And if you pull back and think more neutrally, who in your wide community of anybody who could have access to your program, who do you want to connect to? Based on that answer, who you see, who you don't see, you can ask so many more questions. Who is naturally in your audience? And if they're not there, why not? And how can you really speak to them in a way that they see something familiar? These are door opener questions that Tim calls threshold factors in our book. More importantly, why do you want them to care? And your answers to that will lead you to different choices, of course, of programming. Do you want to inspire sympathy and support? Do you want to advocate or educate? Or do you want to provide comfort or solidarity or escape? And based on these, again, you're going to have a different outreach, different repertoire, and different programming configurations, which the rest of the rubric really breaks down in more detail. But no matter what your answer is to this very first question, the next ones are at the heart of critical good relationships. Whose stories are you telling, and who are you to tell them? And of course, if the answer to these questions is anyone other than yourself and your own story, then you have a great opportunity to dig deeply and get excited to ask more questions and open more options that are really going to change what your organization looks like. So your understanding of anyone else's story has a set of assumptions that may be embedded in it, that you want to be like a 5-year-old of curiosity and just keep asking who and how. And then looking at who can most directly tell that story. Are they in your choir? Are they in your community? Can you form a connection to them? And just as importantly, who may be disaffected by the stories and programs that you present. I, as an example, designed a concert around hunger and homelessness, in which my primary goal was to represent local stories and dig through the issue, which is so very large here in Seattle, to the actual people. And I use this rubric very dynamically. I created partnerships with local organizations. I got a heartbreaking education in what homelessness really looks like in our area. And I was able to design a program that really offered an actionable, impactful experience until, and Alec, I'm going to have you switch the screen. 2 weeks before the concert, I sent out the poster that you will see to the teen housing organization who I had spent the most time with. And after all the work and all that we had learned, this single graphic threatened to actually be the thing to disaffect those who we most wanted to help, and to reinforce a stereotype that was going to put a block for our audience to accessing our concert. And what it was is, you see that there are gloved hands holding a piece of cardboard. This indicated that this was a stereotype of panhandling. And I had just spent my time learning that most homelessness is invisible and does not identify with, and in fact is very worried about the image of homeless people as panhandlers. In this case, my relationship building really saved me, because I had a specific who to point out what was needed and to point out what might happen in response to this poster. And in fact, changing the poster became a part of the story that we told, and it spoke as loudly as any of the polished elements of our performance. If you'll switch back again, Alec. The rest of the rubric, the boxes that are on the main part of it, other than that, are really a big playground for considering repertoire, audience makeup, and different experiences, and breaking the traditional bounds of any choral concert. I'll just highlight a point or two from there. In the sample concert arc for impact, up on the top right corner, I urge you to ask your so what question of your programming. Answer that question early on in your concert, and leave the last question, which is usually the so what kind of a thing, a consideration of what you hope your audiences will do upon leaving their time with you. If there are specific things that you can think of that you might encourage or inspire with your programming. The where and when boxes and the different perspective boxes give you a lot of different ways to use different senses and change the medium of engagement. And I use those back and forth throughout my programming. And finally, the bottom box is for issue-based concerts and asking about what is specifically needed. And it is really important here to get very specific about providing something in a partnership. But it's also really crucial to look at those two bottom right italicized questions. What is possible and appropriate for your organization to give, and which of those needs pairs with your budget and your capacity and your mission? And it's by linking these bottom questions to the questions at the top of the rubric that I have found that you can keep your organization cohesive and healthy and still pursue broadening your relevancy through any concert and through your season as a whole, and broaden your outreach. And this is the synthesis that I came to, and I'm excited to keep using it. I hope it's useful to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think your rubric is pure protein all the way through. It is packed. Every sentence in that rubric is packed with the truth that we learned in our symposium and the various authors gave in their chapters. I particularly like the way you brought out the word empathy, because as we panelists discussed before this webinar went live, right now, we are dealing with COVID-19. And as I said, it's not the elephant in the room, it is the room that we're in. And empathy, of course, is the word that we're all so sensitive to now for our choral art, our audiences, our singers, all of our performers. I want to come back to you right now and ask, with your rubric in mind, which was not just theory, it's beautiful theory, and I've put it into practice, but it is also practicality, it's application. Have you used your rubric now in any way as you look at COVID-19 scenarios? And can you tell us how that may have played out in your life? And I'll remind our audience, you are in the Pacific Northwest, you're in Washington State. This is where you're doing your work.
Yes, yeah. The great news about this rubric is that when we can't sing together, the research survey, the research sample that is your choir and that is your audience, is just primed to be mined. And you can again spin the globe and look at some things differently, which I have been doing with my community groups out here. Outside of your choir, this is an opportunity to look at the community as a whole, and some tools that I am trying out right now is building a map almost of my community and looking at where dark places are, where I don't know very much about them, and looking at where their gathering places are and what arts offerings are there. Kind of some reverse thinking about where am I not in the audience and what is preventing me from being in the audience, and kind of turning it on its head that way. Of course, there might be some really interesting ways to survey your audience in this time that is not qualitative, but is about finding connections and cares and needs. And then within your choir, who is, of course, yearning for our continued community in this time, it is a great time for them to tell you their stories that you may not have known about, their connections and their passions and paths that have been sitting right next to you that you have not known because you've been busy rehearsing and singing with them. From there, I am examining my choral strengths. As we come back together, if we have limitations on that, is not only social distancing or small group work or online work meeting our need for safety, but how can that enhance our ability to tell those stories if we know them? So it starts with knowing them, and then you can go off and program your concert arcs and your seasons that reach out, kind of sitting on this mind bed of information that you may have collected during this time.
Fantastic. That's a great use of our time now and research and your rubric to delve into those topics in those areas. I also think you've touched upon, and I want to move to Juan Carlos Acosta now. I think you've touched upon what I call the secret sauce or the alchemy of relevance, is that you outline in your chapter that we don't do our concerts and we don't do our programming and our work for somebody. We actually, to be successful and to be relevant, the word is you do it with someone. And you point that out. Juan Carlos, I know you're in San Diego area there, and you're working with this idea as well, that you work with people for relevant program. Can you tell us what you have discovered in your research and your presentation?
Absolutely. My contribution to the book is called Creativity and Limitations, and it's all about how restrictions can drive creativity and relevance in choral programming. And I think we are arguably in the most restricted time of choral music ever in our lifetimes, perhaps ever in history, really. And so it seems a little bit odd to be talking about programming, but I think a lot of those same techniques can be applied to the experience that we're having right now. So one of the first things that needs to be done is to figure out what it is we're trying to accomplish. And at the very least, this time away from our choirs, just as Jennifer was saying, it provides us an opportunity to examine what is important and how we accomplish that, particularly when we're not singing together. And I think that we're all finding that second only to the music for choral music, community is paramount to what we do. And so coming out of that, I hosted a Zoom discussion with nearly 80 members of the choral community here in San Diego, thanks to the Choral Consortium of San Diego. And after we worked through the different frustrations that we're all dealing with, technology and limitations and virtual choirs and all of that stuff, we almost universally expressed that it was the people that we were really missing. And that choral music has a way to speak to the humanity of the situation, unlike virtually any other form of communication. And so one of the participants in our group reminded us that we are guardians of a great treasure in choral music, and we must do all we can to continue to share that with the world. Another one of our participants remarked that, we may be, as choir directors, hosting concerts that, get maybe 200 or 300 people to attend the concert. And we are spending hours and hours and hours to do one virtual choir video, but then that virtual choir video is reaching thousands of people in a matter of days. And so there are some really great opportunities that we're experiencing in this time. I'm really excited about the innovation and creativity that we're seeing in our community, but we also have to acknowledge that this is an existential threat for many choral organizations because of funding, because of numbers, whatever it is, particularly in California, where performing arts are traditionally underfunded in the public schools. We're looking at 20% cuts to state funding for public education, which is just unimaginable at this time. So along those lines, I think we also need to acknowledge that this era that we are in is also widening the gaps that are already evident in our society when it comes to access to choral music. So we're doing a lot of things along those lines. So in my chapter, we look at several different elements that can kind of help shift our focus in programming choral music. And I think that we can use those same principles to look at the situation that we're currently dealing with. Of course, identifying the limitations, but along with the limitations becomes opportunities. So we're seeing things like choirs now are getting, singers now are getting more individual feedback from their conductors because they're submitting these recordings, and we are able to listen to them one-on-one. And we are getting more, involvement in different ways that we have in our organizations than we have before. I talk about making connections. Specifically, I use the example of the Golden Bridge, which was kind of championed by Susan Digby. It's this idea that the Tudor era of choral music is kind of a similar time where choral music was thriving, like we are experiencing now in contemporary choral music. And so she likes to pair pieces that were written during that time along with newly composed pieces and show the levels of connection there. And I mean, you could devote a whole book about choral music during the Renaissance and some of the plagues that they were experiencing to what choral music is doing now. So I think it's important for us to find those connections, not just in choral music, but with each other. I've been so excited about all of the ways that, in my book, I talk about, or in the chapter, I talk about reaching out to other folks in the field, specifically composers, because they are incredible resources when it comes to music that is being written now. They're paying attention to each other and communicating in a way that we haven't seen before. And that's still true in this era. And they're all, number of colleagues are coming up with pieces that were specifically designed for Zoom choir, or music theory resources that are being developed. So collaboration is incredibly important during this time, and I think we are in many ways trying to reinvent the wheel in our own areas, but we're all doing this, or I don't like the phrase that we're all in the same boat. We're all in the same storm in our own different boats, but we are all kind of developing these same techniques in parallel. So it's a great opportunity for us to share and work through those things. So I think there's just so much exciting stuff, and there are a lot of parallels between what I talk about in that chapter and the ways we can do things now.
Well, Juan Carlos, I love your optimism, and I love your ability and challenge to all of us to look for the opportunities in our limitations. You have this quote in your chapter. You say limitations may be the most unlikely of places to harness creativity, but perhaps one of the best ways to get ourselves out of ruts, rethink categories, and challenge accepted norms. Have you found that to be the case in COVID-19 environment for yourself? Have you taken your own advice now, and have you found that to be true for you?
Absolutely. And a lot of these areas of growth are not always, welcome. Sometimes they're even painful. As a choral conductor, I have been absolutely opposed to learning tracks and sending things out to my singers. I want them to develop their musicianship, and I want them to be self-responsible musicians. And then I'm finding the benefits of actually sending out these tracks and working through them with my singers, and saying, okay, well, this eighth note needs to be a cutoff here, and they're having to think about things in a way that they never did in a choral situation. So absolutely. And these forms, like I said, these forms of areas of growth, they're not always welcome, not always, sometimes painful, but certainly we're experiencing them.
Thank you. Very positive. Alex Gardner. Alex works with young voices, with children and young adults, and I'd like to switch now to our younger singers. Alex, and the incredible work you're doing there in Pensacola. And by the way, Alex, because of COVID, you were one of the last persons I actually physically was in the room with before
Yes.
I got sequestered. So I got your autograph. You're the only one of the I actually was able to capture. I want to get the rest of the folks' autograph on their chapter, but you and I were together in Mobile when we had to pull the plug on our Southern Region Conference.
Yes.
And I reminded people that night, I said to them, and I did not want to be prophetic, I just was being realistic. I said to the gathered group, I said, you all please soak in and cherish this moment, because I said, if you recall, I said to our audience that night, this may be the last live music we hear for a long time. I'm painful to remind myself that I said that, but you and I were in the room when that happened, and we were listening to some incredible, I had just played banjo with an incredible group of young singers there on the stage, and then we had to all go home, and we've been sheltered ever since. Talk to us about your chapter. This is Leaders of, you cross out the word tomorrow and you say leaders of today, empowering and embracing youth leadership, playing off on the cliche that these are the leaders of tomorrow that you're working with. And you say, no, they are the leaders of today. So tell us about your chapter in our book.
Certainly. And thank you again, Tim and Alec, for hosting this. My chapter, as Tim just said, really focuses on the concept of youth leadership. And within the children's choir world, and especially, even in the school world as well, we understand that kids are capable of so much. They're capable of such high levels of artistry and musicianship. And what my chapter talks about is not, it goes beyond that. It's not about necessarily how good you sound, but what can you physically contribute as a leader. And I talk about a UNICEF-sponsored study, and I think Alec has my graphic in there, about the different levels of youth leadership that occur in different levels of society. So I don't want to go through these levels specifically, but it really talks about how young people are involved in decision-making processes within organizations. At the bottom of this ladder, we talk about ways where youth are not really active participants in making decisions within the organizations that are built to serve them. And then as you move up the ladder, you start seeing more opportunities for young people to get involved in decision making. In the middle column there, in the middle row, I'm sorry, you'll see towards the right, it says adults decide. And that's where young people start getting a little bit more active into the leadership roles. These would be something like a section leader or a council, but the decision making power still rests with adults. And at the very top of the ladder is really where decision making is shared. And this talks about the different roles that young people and adults play in making decisions and making projects and initiatives come to life. So the chapter talks about some very specific examples, and I shared a lot of examples that happen within my own organization. We have a special choir called the Ambassador Choir, and they pair choral singing with community service, and they really focus on unique collaborations with community groups. The one that I speak about specifically is a collaboration we did with the local pediatric cancer research fundraising arm. And they raise a lot of money to help study new techniques to treat pediatric cancer. And we, the singers, got together with what they call the Rally Kids. And these are children who actively have cancer or have recently finished treatment for cancer. And they worked through a series of activities to create a song that was created, melody and lyrics, completely by the singers. And then they presented that at a concert to help raise funds for that organization. Another example is through our local children's hospital. Our singers decided that they wanted to do a Christmas caroling event. And what we did as the staff is we just sort of facilitated that experience for them. They created, they wanted to become elves. And so they got costumes and they wrote letters and created fictitious elf personalities. The whole event was really created by them. And the adults, we just sort of facilitated. And I know Tim is going to lead me towards that COVID-19 thread. And I will say that we're continuing that work in our organization through our leadership council. They've actually, they took it upon themselves to create a little parody video that changed the words to "How Far I'll Go" from Moana to "I'll Be About Hand Washing." And they completely did it on their own. They videotaped it, they strung it together, and then they presented it to us. We didn't even really know that it was happening. But I say all of this because, especially in the ocean of COVID-19 that we are in, we're finding in our organization that the answers to the questions that we are all being burdened with can be lightened and incredibly informed when you just ask the people who you're serving what they want and what they need. And we've really leaned heavily on our singers and our parents as well to help provide us with feedback on how we can continue to serve our community. And that level of trust and candidness is built upon this foundation of shared leadership, which we employ in various different degrees. Yeah, so that's really the summary. And there's just a lot of opportunities with shared leadership. It challenges some very traditional models of choral structures, especially in terms of leadership and especially in terms of a children's choir, which is what I specifically framed this chapter on. But there's a lot of broad applications to this concept of shared leadership, and it's really transformed our organization, and there's a lot of possibility there.
Well, Alec, in my chapter, when I talk about relevance as being part golf swing, I talk about identifying the audience, which is what Jennifer outlines in her rubric. But I outline, in terms of identifying our audience, I identify 3 segments of an audience that we are trying to be relevant to. Number one is the insiders, those people that actually have already bought into what we're doing. Those are the families, the singers, the people that are directly related. The second area I talk about in relevance is the outsiders, the folks that know about what we're doing, but haven't been brought in. Perhaps people who are sensitive to the arts or sensitive to music, sensitive to what we're doing in our communities with our ensemble, but they have not become attenders of our concerts or followers of our organization. And then the third segment I talk about is what I call the people that are asleep. They have no idea who we are or what we're doing. That's the distant audience that a lot of people are trying to go after in their marketing, are the people that are just unaware of what they're doing in the first place. I think what I appreciate a lot about how you have identified your work right now, particularly in COVID-19, is you've looked at those insiders and realized that the very thing they come to you for, that singing a part of that community, is something that they haven't been able to do in the same way. But you've gone after them and you've kept them engaged. The insiders with what you're doing in terms of the activities that you're sharing now. And I think that's a very smart way to go. Would you talk just a moment about, I'm very impressed with the handbook that you just put together for your organization. Did you use shared leadership in that handbook? And if so, I mean, again, I'm pressuring you on your own theory. Did you go to your own people to create that handbook for how you all are going forward? Or if not, how are you using shared leadership right now in addition to the video that you talked about?
Certainly. So what Tim is talking about, this handbook, my board of directors put together a response framework to help guide me and my staff in making decisions for the next year, helped kind of lift the load off of my shoulders a little bit, which was incredibly helpful. And that is a good question. You are putting me on the spot. And yes, we did engage in some shared leadership discussions to help inform the response framework that we put together. That was largely done through a survey. At the beginning of when back in March, we had to close down. We quickly put together an online program, and we really did not solicit a lot of feedback for, because we were trying to do it very quickly. But as we went, we started soliciting feedback on what things were working and what things weren't, and what kids were missing. And we found that, as we've all been talking about, the active singing, we're missing that. And so we tried to figure out, we blew that up a lot higher and said, what about that specifically are we missing? And for our young people, we found through some surveying questions that the thing that they miss the most is being together in a social setting and the ability to express themselves, which is a severe crisis that we're going to be dealing with if we're not already dealing with it. The feeling of stress and anxiety in young people as a result of this pandemic, it was already high when we went in, and now it is through the roof. And so we altered our program based on feedback, and we found that about 95% of our singers said that our online programming was helping them manage their stress and anxiety. And we took that feedback and then sort of built that framework around it. But yes, the concept of this shared leadership, it's really going to inform a lot of what we are going to do going forward. I speak specifically for my organization, and I certainly challenge everybody else to really consider, what voice are you giving to the people who you serve? Because that really is going to make your response relevant and keep you afloat.
Thank you, Alec. Great answer. Well, continuing with young singers and older young singers, I go to Joy Hirakawa. Joy has been a right-hand person for me in my work with ACDA, as she serves our national repertoire and resources area of children and community youth. Joy's chapter in our book is called Choral Village, an Immersive Experience to Build Cultural Sensitivity and Empathy. And there's that word empathy again, Joy. Thank you for the work you're doing. Can you share with us about your chapter and very specifically the Choral Village?
Yeah, sure. Alec has some slides that we're going to put up, but Alec, I'm going to skip most of the slides. I'm going to do just a couple of them, actually, because in the interest of time, I want to make sure people have an opportunity to answer questions. I started choral. First of all, thank you, Alec and Tim, for hosting this. This is really a wonderful opportunity for us to share our ideas and whatnot. I started Choral Village in 4 years ago in 2017, and it came out of a need that I felt. It was that summer that there were all of those shootings, particularly in our communities of color, and it was just so troubling. And I thought, what can we do? We're choral musicians. What can I do? What can our organization do? How can we help? What can we do to help? So as singers and as choral people, we sing, and when we have a problem, right? When we have an issue, when there's a tragedy, when there's something, we come together through singing. But as I was researching, I thought, well, what would happen if we were to enhance that by connecting with other arts and other artistic expression? So if you could go to the second slide, please. And this became our purpose. The purpose of Choral Village was to intentionally bring together middle school-aged youth from diverse backgrounds to develop cross-cultural understanding and empathy through activities including theatrical games, drum circles, musical experiences, shared meals, choral singing, and guest artist presentations. Yes, it's a lot. It's a very intense week. It's a very, very busy week. There's a few keywords I want to bring to your attention out of that purpose. One is the middle school age, because I felt that they would be an age group that we could be most impactful with. They are struggling with so many aspects of life, just being a middle school student. And they seem to be, in my experience, malleable, interesting, and are open and willing to try things. So I thought that would be a great age. Diverse backgrounds, very, very important, because they are not going to learn about other people unless they're with other people who are not like themselves. So we actively sought out young people from diverse ethnic, faith, gender, you name it, socioeconomic. We wanted to have a diverse population because research tells us that that's the way you learn the most. We ended up including choral singing, of course, and the music was selected from to be representative of the students' backgrounds as much as we possibly could. We started the day with singing and we ended the day with singing each day. We did theatrical games, and these were not theatrical games in the sense of trying to build theatrical skills, but rather it comes from a tradition that of Auguste Boal, Theater of the Oppressed, which is based on Paulo Freire, theater, the pedagogy of the oppressed. And it comes from a different place. The idea is to promote dialogue, to learn how to communicate well and how to build empathy, how to identify your values, that sort of thing. So that generated a lot of really interesting and pretty deep discussion. And we felt the students would probably need a release and a break. And that's where the drumming comes in, not only to provide release, but also to provide a sense of unity and building a sense of a commonality with everyone drumming together. We had have a Middle Eastern musician who does Middle Eastern drumming patterns with the students, and the sense of entrainment when they all are drumming together is quite palpable to the students, and they find it really a fascinating kind of unifying experience. Shared meals became a very important part of it, because if you sit down and break bread with somebody, that is sociologically a very significant thing to do when you're sharing food. And our food was always connected with our afternoon presenter. So whoever was presenting in the afternoon, of the culture bearer, the meal at lunchtime was of the same background. So we contacted our local ethnic restaurants. We contacted our local musicians who are in our various communities. So we had all kinds of food, Ukrainian food, Puerto Rican food, Indian food, all kinds of food. And then that afternoon, somebody from that background or culture would present to the students. We had presenters on everything: body percussion, hip hop, Middle Eastern music, Mexican folk dance, American folk dance, Ukrainian folk dance, Puerto Rican folk dance, Latin percussion. It really ran the gamut. And the important thing was that we were connecting with people in our community. We are in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, which is the Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton area. It's in southeastern Pennsylvania, about an hour north of Philadelphia. And it's a quite diverse community in all actuality. And these guest artists were always so eager to share the culture and to just connect with the students and the young people. So Alec, I'm going to ask you to skip down to slide 10. We did a pre-test, post-test research on this. We have research materials that came to us from Boston Youth Arts Education, and they provide their materials free of charge to anybody who wants to use them, and encourage you to adapt them to your own situation. But this question I thought was really interesting. When you think about school, home, friends, your life, what, if anything, has changed because of your involvement here? And even though the survey questions were not statistically significant, these questions, these open-ended answers, I felt were really significant and helped us to understand that we were really getting through to the students after a very full and rich week. If you could go to the next slide then. Our theater director summed it up, I think, particularly well at the end. talking about the reflections, and the students talked about being surprised to learn how much they had in common with other students who appeared to be so different from them. And that was really revelatory for all of us. If you could go to the next slide, there is a QR code here, and if you want a more extensive, the extensive research and the background and all of the resources, and a more extensive PowerPoint with all the notes and everything, the QR code will take you to a file for that, and you're welcome to go there. That experience has been, doing the program has just been really powerful and impactful for all of us involved with it. So that's it in a nutshell. Kind of racing through it, but there we are.
Thank you, Joy. I may come back to you in just a second. So thank you for your work there. Alec, I know we've been gathering questions for our panelists, and as we've been going through, let me throw in one big plug, Alec, before I turn it back to you, and that is tomorrow afternoon, the National Association of Teachers of Singing, Chorus America, the American Choral Directors Association, Barbershop Harmony Society, and the Performing Medical Arts organization, we are going to present a 90-minute webinar tomorrow afternoon. It's placed on NAT's website and it's open and free. There's no enrollment cap, so everyone can watch it. But we're going to probably speak to a lot of the questions that our viewers have right now on very practical applications of technology, things that can be done in the virtual space for rehearsing pedagogy. We're bringing in experts, actually mechanical engineers, others that are working on latency and synchronicity problems and issues. We're also going to give some really, I'm not going to call them best examples or best practices, because no one has any right now, but we have some examples of things that people are doing right now. People such as Francesco and Elizabeth Nunez with the Young Persons Chorus of New York City, about how they're rehearsing during this time. We've got my colleague from Europe, Sonia Greiner, who's going to be talking about people who are rehearsing in their cars using FM radio waves, all kinds of things that people are doing. We're going to do those examples tomorrow. So that might be of interest to our listeners today, to know that tomorrow on that webinar, we're going to go into real practical, immediate practices and exercises. But let me turn it back to you, Alec, for any questions that you would like to moderate right now.
Sure, thanks, Tim. There are a lot of questions related to COVID-19. I think we need to talk about that for a second. I mean, I think that honestly, in this day and age, a lot of folks are just, they're kind of scared about where we're going. Is there going to be a decline in the choral arts in the next school year? I know for me, one thing I have been encouraged about is people need to sing. Singing needs to happen. It's just part of who we are as people and as our life. And that side of it does give me hope. But when we hear about, there's one a person, Virginia Gandy from Kentucky, who says they're already cutting band and some sports programs. And how do we advocate for our art in this COVID-19 era? I think that's an important question. Tim?
I'll jump in first, and I'd like to hear quickly from everyone. First of all, you do have to be at the table. You need to be there, and when these conversations are going on. If you expect the phone to call to invite you to come, you've waited too late. So you've got to be there, either advocating, writing letters, being in the face of those, and be a part of the decision-making to express the things that we know that we are able to do. So that's my first response. I'm sure there are other responses from others.
With soccer, so the professional choir that I direct called Sacra Profana, we do a summer choral intensive week-long camp, and this year we're moving it to an online format, and we're partnering with local educators to help develop, remote music education techniques in tandem with them, and use it almost as a laboratory so that we can develop these things, and that we can then show final products and a curriculum that we can take to districts when they're talking about doing those things. So I have a lot of colleagues who are already kind of writing out their curriculum for the fall so that they can show, administrators, hey, this is what we can do. We don't necessarily need to call it choir, but it is still vocal music, and there's a lot of learning that can be taking place.
I'll jump in here. I think the response, Alec, you said, people have to sing. people need to make music. We are compelled to do this. And I think that's a really important point to make. And what we can offer is an opportunity for creativity and a means of trying to figure out, how do we feel about this whole situation? How do we respond to it? How do I even process, especially for our young people? How do we process how they feel about that? You know, can they sing? Can they improvise? Can they write a song? Can they write a poem? It's the creative outlet is a way of dealing with their emotions and their loss. And they are feeling loss. They're feeling grief. They're feeling, you know, terrible about all the things that they've had to cancel out at the end of their school year, all of those milestone events for many of the students. So I would argue, in terms of advocacy, that they need us now more than ever, and they will really need us as we start to emerge from all of this.
I agree with Joy, especially. The aspect that she's talking about there is really, that's an important message to share. And we have to aggressively tell that story. And so my contribution is saying, figure out who in your circle, in your sphere of influence, who is someone who can really help you tell your story and get that message known and broadcast. We are only one person, and we are the most knowledgeable person about what we do, but we have to broaden our storytelling to cater to a wider section of audience. To Tim, your point, that third group, the people who are asleep, we need to find ways to engage them and get them on our side. And I can say locally here, I have a parent in our organization who is a contributor to our local newspaper. So I got in with her and I asked her to edit an advocacy article that we submitted for publication, and it was published. And that's the type of work that wouldn't be possible if I didn't know my people and my community. And so I would suggest, especially, dig deep and find your advocates, find your partners to help you in this quest, because it's a big burden to shoulder alone.
And Alec, I would say, I didn't know the editor of the Washington Post. I didn't have them in my choir. I just reached out and I said, I'm going to tell my story here. And I've done that all over the country. And that's what we need to be doing at this time, because we're pedagogues. First and foremost, we are teachers. Maestro means teacher. And that's what we do. Teaching has not gone away. Nothing eradicated that. So we just have to teach in new forms. And I appreciate what you all are saying, that you're converting your forms of teaching, but none of that went away. So we now have to show we can do it this way.
I would say too that what I've learned most, I work with adult singers predominantly, and I know a little bit from them that they really talk about shared leadership in the adult world, like you're doing in the youth world, Alex. They will tell you exactly what choir gives them that no other place gives them. And this, more than any other time, we need to realize that people who are not in the choral world, the people who are asleep, as you say, they don't understand things that we take for granted. And so this is the time to get your membership and your parents and you're out there. And I'll add to that and say that my colleagues at the University of Washington, who generally are quite younger and earlier in their education than I am, they had to learn that this quarter about their choirs. They did not realize that their college students would be able to express so specifically why they wanted online choir and community building to keep happening. They thought that the students would be more dismissive of it than they were. And so those voices are there and ready to be tapped and can speak louder than ours in some ways.
That's a question I have too. What I think some teachers maybe are afraid about empowering their students or using their students too much to advocate for a choral program. What is the line there? How can you use kids, or is it even appropriate, or is it better to just work for parents and the broader systems to advocate for choral programs?
I actually specifically talk about that in my chapter, the ability to use, or the decision to use children to tell your story. Actually, the examples I use are at the bottom of my ladder. That's the thing about tokenism and manipulation, these bad words. And the reason that we tend to get into those categories is because we ask kids to do something that they don't fully understand what they're doing. I could certainly if I talk to one of my third graders and ask them to tell me what they love about choir, and then ask them if they're okay to tell someone else that, that's their decision. They are making that decision. They are becoming your partner. It's not tokenistic to ask someone to share why what we do is important to them. It's about how we inform the person who's doing it, and setting them up for success and fully understanding what they're doing. So.
Great, thank you. I think most of the other questions are, has anyone considered rehearsing outdoors during this time? Is that something we can do?
We'll have a panelist tomorrow talk about that, Alec, but let's hear if anybody else has done that in our panel here.
There's actually a group of folks in San Diego that are talking about, doing marching choir, with some of the information that they had from the previous webinar. We're definitely looking forward to what happens tomorrow, but we're certainly exploring the option, but also kind of incorporating technology so that we can be rehearsing together, but maybe also recording at the same time. So, certainly some options out there.
Are any of you aware of any software or any programs? I know, Tim, you talked a little bit about latency, and that's something you talk about tomorrow, but what's coming on the tech front that you think will help the choral arts?
We have a program that we'll be presenting tomorrow from Berlin, Germany, called Digital Soundstage, in which we are able to have 5 singers that can listen to each other at the same time with relatively little latency or problem, so that you can actually hear another singer while you're singing with them. Up to 5 people right now, and we probably will see that grow to maybe 10 to 15 by the middle of the summer. So there is a technology we'll present in detail tomorrow on this webinar called Digital Soundstage. It is a nonprofit group that works with German choirs, and they have developed this programming. We've also talked to Jumulus and others, folks that are dealing with other kinds of synchronicity, but this is the best I've found. And as I say, it's called Digital Soundstage. If someone wants to Google that now, they'll find it. But tomorrow we're going to actually give them 10 minutes on our webinar to unpack what this program can do. It's the best that I've found worldwide.
One question that I have is, I've seen some news reports about COVID getting spread in a choral rehearsal right before all of this came down. But I've also seen other reports that say that no, that wasn't the rehearsal itself. It was just all the meeting and greeting that happened before and after the rehearsal that spread the disease. And I know that ACDA and others are getting together to really dive down and really understand, because there is so much the research, so much we don't know that's research and fact-based. So maybe, Tim, if you could talk for a second about where you're headed with some of the research.
ACDA and many other performing arts organizations has contributed to a study that begins June 1st at Colorado University of Colorado. And a second study is going to take place, interestingly, at Colorado State University, in which by the end of June, we will have tested through laboratory aerosol testing. We'll find out what does happen in an actual rehearsal room. So it is being tested over the month of June. Those results will be public. We will make them widespread. We don't, of course, it's research. We do not know what the answer is. Now, I will say that Richard Reed, who broke that story with the LA Times, who is the Seattle-based writer who wrote that story on Skagit, is it Skagit, Jennifer Skagit? Skagit? Yeah.
Skagit Valley.
He has interviewed several of us now, and he's doing a follow-up story. And I invited him to talk to the researchers that are doing the work at Colorado. So not only, again, Alec, advocacy, I've invited the author who broke that story to talk to those that are doing the research that's going to happen in June, because as to Alex Gardner's point, I want the very guy that broke the story to perhaps be related to the research that's going to take place, that's going to tell us what does go on in a rehearsal room. So we have to know science. We've got to know really what's going on. We can't just infer this from other things. We have to really know what's going on. And we are all about singers' safety. We're all about singers' health. So we are the ones that need to know this, and we are contributing hard dollars to this research study so that we can really know how we can go forward safely in a rehearsal setting.
Well, Tim, I applaud you and ACD and all the other organizations who are going to work from facts and not assumptions to really get to the bottom of this, because then we can make real decisions as leaders and directors about what's in the best interest of our programs and our students, for sure. Okay, I think,
Can I
yes,
just-
Joy.
I just put in the chat column. I've been maintaining a spreadsheet and Google Drive. Every time I find a good research article that I think is appropriate for what we're looking for, I've been listing it there. So there's the link. I've made it public. So anytime I find stuff, I put it in on the Children and Youth, the ACDA Children and Youth Repertoire Facebook page. So if you're looking for stuff for kids, I put a lot of things there. But that Google Drive document is where I put all the links and a brief annotation about articles that are relevant to COVID specific and singing. So there you have it.
Thank you, Joy. And we'll share this out, this chat and all of these links on our GI Music Facebook page for music education. And of course, we're going to post this webinar as well. So again, I just want to thank the panelists. We're a little past the hour. So thank everyone for your insights. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Memorial Day. And we'll see you on the road and hopefully at another ACDA conference or meeting or concert somewhere soon as we possibly can, and very much look forward to it. And again, thank you all for your wisdom and creating relevant choral programs all over around the world. Thanks again.
Thank you, Alec.
Thank you,
All right.
Alec.
Sure.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best.